The piercing, high-pitched scream of the infusion pump alarm cut through the quiet afternoon like a shard of ice. Dr. Evelyn Reed, momentarily lost in the sterile language of a complex case file spread across her dining room table, felt her blood run cold before the sound even fully registered. It wasn't the low battery chirp or the minor occlusion warning. This was the critical alert, the one that signaled catastrophe. Leo. She was moving before the thought-completed chair, scraping violently against the hardwood floor case files, scattering unnoticed. She sprinted down the hallway to her son Leo's room, her heart hammering against her ribs, with a force that threatened to crack them. The room, normally a sanctuary of calm blues and soft lamplight meticulously adapted for 10-year-old Leo's complex medical needs, was now filled with the insistent, terrifying electronic shriek. Leo lay in his bed, his small face usually pale but composed, now tinged with a terrifying grayish-blue hue. His breathing was shallow, ragged. His eyes, moments ago focused on the animated movie playing softly on the tablet propped beside him, were half-closed, fluttering weakly. The monitor displaying his vital signs beside the bed painted a nightmare in stark, flashing red numbers. Heart rate erratic and plummeting. Oxygen saturation levels critically low. "Leo, honey, stay with me." Evelyn's voice was sharp, cutting through her own rising panic. Her hands flew to his side, years of medical training and maternal instinct merging into a single, focused entity. Check airway. Assess breathing. Circulation. Her fingers found his pulse at his neck, faint and thready. The IV line snaking from the pump to the central line port, carefully embedded beneath the skin of his upper chest, was still connected. The pump itself still alarming, indicating. What flow obstruction? No. The screen indicated infusion complete, yet the bag wasn't empty. Something was terribly wrong. She hit the emergency call button, linked directly to the specialist pediatric home care nursing service, while simultaneously grabbing the emergency oxygen tank and mask stored beside his bed. Every piece of equipment, every contingency meticulously planned for managing Leo's rare mitochondrial disorder, a condition that robbed his cells of energy and required constant life-sustaining intravenous fluids and medications. This wasn't a typical crisis related to his condition. This felt different, faster, more sinister. As she fitted the oxygen mask over Leo's small cyanotic face, her eyes scanned the IV setup again. The pump, the line, the medication bag hanging innocuously on its stand. Nothing looked obviously tampered with. Yet Leo was crashing, deteriorating with a speed she hadn't seen since his initial near-fatal diagnosis years ago. "Hang on, baby, hang on," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her forced calm as she adjusted the oxygen flow. "Mommy's here. Help is coming." The rational part of her brain, the part honed by years of navigating medical complexities, the part that now led the city's elite medical investigations unit, began desperately searching for answers beyond the immediate stabilization. What had changed in the last hour? Who had been in the room? Just her. And the home health nurse, Sarah, who had left less than 30 minutes ago after changing his IV bag and checking his vitals, which had been stable. Everything documented procedure followed. Sarah was meticulous, experienced, trusted. Then another image flashed through her mind, irrelevant, annoying, yet suddenly chilling. Karen Miller, head of the Neighborhood Homeowners Association, standing on her front lawn earlier that morning, her expression pinched with disapproval as the medical supply truck made its weekly delivery. Karen, who had made no secret of her disdain for the unsightly medical equipment, the frequent nurse visits the very presence of a chronically ill child, disrupting the curated perfection of their upscale suburban enclave. Karen, who had cornered Evelyn by the mailbox just yesterday, complaining about a perceived infraction involving the precise placement of their recycling bins. her voice dripping with passive-aggressive venom. Evelyn shook the thought away. Ridiculous. Unthinkable. Karen was petty, intrusive, obsessed with trivial rules, but this was monstrous. It couldn't be. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The nursing service dispatcher was still on the line, calm professional relaying Leo's vitals. Evelyn's focus snapped back entirely to her son. Her professional identity, the chief of the MIU, receded, momentarily eclipsed by the primal terror of a mother watching her child slip away. She checked the IV line access again, her fingers tracing the tubing. Had something infiltrated the line? A contaminant? An air embolus? Or something worse? Something deliberate? The thought, insidious and terrifying, refused to be dismissed. The world narrowed to the sound of Leo's struggling breath, the flashing red numbers and the chilling, unanswered question, "What happened to my son?" The controlled chaos of the emergency response team arriving filled the house, a whirlwind of paramedics' equipment and urgent clipped communication. Evelyn stepped back, providing Leo's complex medical history with practiced efficiency, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She watched as they worked, stabilizing Leo, establishing a new IV line, preparing him for transport to the pediatric intensive care unit at University Hospital. Every instinct screamed for her to ride in the ambulance to stay glued to Leo's side, but another instinct, colder and sharper, was already taking hold. The instinct of Chief Evelyn Reed, head of the MIU, as they wheeled Leo out, his small form, almost lost amidst the equipment. Evelyn's gaze fell again on the discarded IV bag and tubing the paramedics had quickly removed and replaced. Standard procedure. But her mind flashed with forensic protocols. Evidence. Chain of custody. "Wait!" she commanded, her voice regaining its professional authority, stopping one of the paramedics who was about to bundle the used supplies into a biohazard bag. "I need that. Bag it separately. Label it. Everything connected to that infusion pump. The bag, the tubing, the pump itself." The paramedic looked at her, surprised by the intensity in her tone, but seeing the steely resolve in her eyes, perhaps recognizing her even without a uniform, he nodded. "Yes, ma'am, right away." Evelyn watched him carefully seal the items in evidence bags, her mind already working, compartmentalizing the overwhelming fear, channeling it into procedural clarity. Something had been introduced into Leo's IV line. She was becoming increasingly certain of it. And if that were true, this wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a crime scene. Leo's bedroom was a crime scene. After the ambulance pulled away, its sirens fading into the distance, Evelyn stood alone in the now eerily quiet house. The silence pressed in thick with the residue of fear and the lingering scent of antiseptic. She took several deep, steadying breaths, forcing the image of Leo's gray face from her immediate focus. She couldn't fall apart. Not now. Leo needed her strong, and he needed her smart. She pulled out her phone not to call the hospital for an update. She knew her team there would call her the instant they had news, but to call her own unit. "This is Chief Reed," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I have a situation. Potential medical sabotage involving my son, Leo Reed. Location is my residence. I need a full forensic team here stat. And notify Detective Miller. No, not Miller. Notify Detective Chen. Assign her as primary. I want the scene processed immediately. Seal the residence. No one in or out without my authorization." She disconnected the call, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. Detective Isabella Chen was her best investigator, methodical, sharp, and fiercely loyal. Evelyn knew she couldn't lead this investigation herself. The conflict of interest was too profound. But she would oversee it. She would use every resource, every skill she possessed to find out who had done this to her child. She walked slowly back into Leo's room. The cheerful blue walls, the posters of astronauts and dinosaurs, the shelf filled with audiobooks he loved. It all seemed mocking now. Her gaze swept the room not as a mother, but as an investigator. Windows locked, door closed but not locked when she ran in. No signs of forced entry. Access point the IV line itself. Easy to inject something into the port on the tubing if someone knew what they were doing, or even if they didn't, if their only goal was harm. Who had the opportunity? Sarah the nurse had been here. But Sarah adored Leo, had cared for him for years. It made no sense. Evelyn herself? Impossible. That left WHO visitors. They hadn't had any today. Deliveries, the supply truck driver had stayed outside. Karen Miller. The image of her disapproving face resurfaced. Karen, who lived just 2 doors down. Karen, who had access to the neighborhood. Karen, who seemed to possess an almost pathological need to control her environment, an environment that Evelyn and Leo, with their medical realities, disrupted. Could petty HOA disputes escalate to attempted murder? It seemed insane. But Evelyn had seen enough darkness in her career, enough irrationality masked by suburban normalcy, to know that the unthinkable was always possible. She needed proof. Conjecture and maternal instinct weren't enough. The evidence bags containing the IV supplies held the key. Toxicology would tell the tale. Her forensic team arrived within 20 minutes, efficient and somber, knowing this was not just another case, but one involving their chief's own child, Detective Chen. A petite woman with eyes that missed nothing met Evelyn at the door. "Chief," Chen said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm so sorry. How's Leo?" "Critical. On his way to pick you," Evelyn replied, forcing the words out. "Izzy, I need you to treat this like any other potential homicide attempt. Rigorous. By the book. The IV bag and tubing are priority 1 for toxicology. I want results yesterday." "Understood, Chief." Chen nodded. "We'll handle it. You should go to the hospital. Be with your son." Evelyn hesitated. Every fiber of her being screamed to be at Leo's side. But leaving now felt like abandoning the first step towards justice. "Process the scene first. I need to know what we're dealing with. I'll head over as soon as you have initial findings." Chen held her gaze for a moment, seeing the conflict, the agony beneath the professional mask. "We'll be fast, Chief. Go, we've got this." Finally, Evelyn nodded, grabbing her keys, the mother overriding the chief just long enough to race towards the hospital, towards the flashing red lights, and the uncertainty leaving her home, her son's sanctuary, in the capable hands of her team, as they began to meticulously peel back the layers of a crime too horrific to comprehend. The quiet, tree-lined street, with its perfectly manicured lawns and air of peaceful prosperity, now felt like a hunting ground. And Evelyn knew with chilling certainty that the predator was likely living among them, perhaps watching even now from behind their own pristine windows. The hours that followed were a blur of fluorescent lights, hushed medical jargon, and the gut-wrenching helplessness of watching her child fight for his life in the pediatric intensive care unit. Leo was stabilized, but barely. He was intubated, a ventilator breathing for him, his small chest rising and falling in an unnatural rhythm. Lines and wires connected him to a constellation of monitors, each beep and flicker a potential harbinger of hope or disaster. Evelyn sat by his bedside, holding his small, limp hand, her gaze fixed on his face, willing him to fight to hold on. Doctors and nurses moved in and out, speaking in low tones, their faces grim but professional. They were running every test imaginable, trying to identify the cause of the sudden catastrophic collapse. Evelyn provided Leo's baseline medical information, the nuances of his mitochondrial disorder, but she held back her suspicion about the IV line, waiting for confirmation from her team. Voicing it now without proof would only muddy the waters of his immediate medical care. Her phone buzzed. It was Detective Chen. Evelyn stepped out into the sterile quiet of the hallway, bracing herself. "Chief," Chen's voice was tight. "We got the preliminary tox screen back from the lab on the IV fluid and tubing." "And?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Positive. For ethylene glycol, significant concentration. Ethylene glycol, antifreeze, colorless, odorless, slightly sweet tasting. Lethal, easily injectable into an IV line port, easily mistaken by a child or even an adult as just another part of the complex medical regimen. It wasn't a random contaminant, it was poison. Deliberate." A cold, hard rage settled over Evelyn, displacing some of the fear. Antifreeze. Someone had intentionally pumped antifreeze into her vulnerable son's veins. "Confirm site security," Evelyn asked, her voice now dangerously calm, the voice of the chief. "Confirmed. No signs of forced entry. We're canvassing the neighborhood now, checking for doorbell cameras witnesses who might have seen someone near your house around the time the nurse left." "Check Karen Miller's residence specifically," Evelyn ordered. "2 doors down, see if her cameras, if any, cover my porch or side yard." "Already on it, Chief," Chen replied. "We've also spoken to the home health nurse, Sarah. She's devastated. Provided a detailed timeline of her visit. Standard procedure changed. The bag-checked vitals left approximately 30 minutes before you called 911. No one else entered the room while she was there. She saw Karen Miller outside when she arrived, trimming her hedges." 30 minutes. A small window. Enough time for someone to slip in, inject the poison, and slip out, especially if they knew Evelyn was occupied. Had Karen been watching, waiting? "Keep digging, Izzy," Evelyn said. "I need motive. I need opportunity. I need proof linking a specific individual to that injection." She returned to Leo's bedside, the knowledge of the poison a heavy weight in her chest. She informed the lead intensivist, Dr. Ramirez, no relation to the CPS worker from the previous story concept, about the toxicology findings. A new wave of activity erupted as the medical team adjusted Leo's treatment, initiating dialysis, administering the antidote fomepizole fighting to counteract the devastating effects of the ethylene glycol on his already fragile system. The next few days were a grueling vigil. Leo remained critical, hovering between life and death. Evelyn barely left the hospital, sleeping fitfully in the uncomfortable waiting room chair, surviving on stale coffee and sheer willpower. Her team at the MIU worked tirelessly, running down leads, analyzing forensic evidence from the house, interviewing neighbors. The neighborhood canvass yielded little. Most residents hadn't seen anything unusual. Polite expressions of concern were offered, but underneath, Evelyn sensed the familiar suburban detachment, the reluctance to get involved. Doorbell cameras provided fragmented views, none capturing anyone approaching Evelyn's house during the critical window. Karen Miller was interviewed by Detective Chen. She was, according to Chen, perfectly composed, expressing shock and sympathy over Leo's illness, offering prayers for his recovery. She denied seeing anyone near Evelyn's house after the nurse left. Her own security cameras conveniently only covered her front door and driveway, not the street or Evelyn's property. She stuck to her story, smooth and plausible, the picture of a concerned neighbor. But Chen noted Karen's eyes remained cold, calculating, lacking genuine empathy. The first break came not from a witness, but from the meticulous work of the forensic team back at Evelyn's house. While processing the area around the IV stand in Leo's room, they found a single, almost invisible droplet of a clear, viscous liquid on the floor near the leg of the stand, a droplet that had somehow missed the initial cleanup. It wasn't IV fluid. Preliminary tests indicated it was consistent with undiluted ethylene glycol, and crucially embedded within that droplet was a single microscopic fiber. Not from Leo's bedding, not from Evelyn's clothes, not from the nurse's uniform. A synthetic fiber dyed a distinctive shade of magenta. Chen relayed the information to Evelyn. "Magenta fiber, Chief. Very specific shade. Doesn't match anything standard we've found at the scene. Magenta. Evelyn's mind raced. She pictured Karen Miller. Her wardrobe consisted mostly of neutral tones, beige, gray, navy. Perfectly coordinated, blandly respectable HOA attire. But hadn't she been wearing something different yesterday morning? A scarf? Evelyn hadn't paid close attention, too preoccupied with getting Leo settled and dealing with Karen's complaints about the recycling bins. "Izzy," Evelyn said urgently, "check the surveillance footage from the neighborhood entrance gate from yesterday morning, and check the security feed from the grocery store down the street, the pharmacy, anywhere Miller might have been. Look for what she was wearing, specifically any accessories. A scarf, maybe." It was a long shot based on a fleeting, uncertain memory, but right now it was all they had. While Chen's team pursued the fiber lead, Evelyn focused on motive. Why would Karen Miller do something so monstrous? Disputes over HOA rules seemed disproportionate. Was there something else? Evelyn started digging into Karen Miller's background, using her authority to access databases not typically available to civilian investigators. She ran financial checks, property records, civil litigation searches. What she found began to paint a different picture of the meticulously composed HOA president. Karen Miller and her husband were facing significant financial difficulties hidden behind their expensive mortgage and outward appearances. Several failed investments mounting credit card debt. Their house, their primary asset, was deeply underwater, and property values on Hemlock Lane, while high, had reportedly seen a slight dip in the last year, a fact Karen had lamented loudly at recent HOA meetings, often subtly blaming factors that made the neighborhood seem less desirable, including Evelyn suspected the visible reminders of Leo's illness. Could Karen have believed that removing Leo, the problem, would somehow stabilize her precarious financial situation by boosting property values? It was a chilling, narcissistic leap of logic, but not outside the realm of possibility for a desperate, disturbed individual. Then Chen called back, her voice tight with excitement. "Chief, we got her." "Talk to me, Izzy." "Local grocery store surveillance from yesterday afternoon. Karen Miller, clear as day. And guess what she's wearing around her neck?" Evelyn held her breath. "A scarf," Chen said. "A very distinctive, very bright magenta scarf. The lab is getting a warrant to retrieve the scarf from her residence for fiber comparison. But Chief, this is it. Opportunity, proximity, potential motive, and now forensic evidence linking her directly to the scene." Evelyn closed her eyes, a wave of cold, grim satisfaction washing over her. They had her. Now it was time to bring her in. But simply arresting her wasn't enough. Evelyn wanted Karen Miller to face not just the law, but the community she terrorized with her petty tyranny, the community whose indifference had nearly cost Leo his life. The annual HOA summer picnic was scheduled for the upcoming Saturday. It would be the perfect venue. Leo, against all odds, began to slowly, miraculously turn a corner. The dialysis was working, filtering the poison from his small body. The antidote was helping his organs recover. He was still incredibly weak, still reliant on the ventilator some of the time, but his color was returning, his vital signs stabilizing. Dr. Ramirez cautiously termed his condition guarded but improving. The immediate crisis seemed to be passing, though the long-term effects of the poisoning were still unknown. Seeing that flicker of resilience in her son fueled Evelyn's resolve. She spent the next few days meticulously building the case with Detective Chen and the district attorney's office, ensuring every piece of evidence was airtight, every legal requirement met. The warrant for the magenta scarf was executed. It was found tucked away in Karen Miller's closet. The fibers were a perfect match to the one found in the ethylene glycol droplet in Leo's room. They also obtained warrants for her computer and phone records, revealing searches for untraceable poisons and information on IV line access, damning evidence of premeditation. The plan for the arrest was set. It would happen at the HOA picnic held at the community park at the end of Hemlock Lane. Evelyn wanted the arrest to be public, a stark confrontation that would strip away Karen's facade of respectability in front of the very neighbors she sought to control. Saturday dawned bright and sunny, a perfect summer day that felt utterly incongruous with the darkness Evelyn carried. She wouldn't be attending the picnic as a resident, but as Chief Reed, flanked by Detective Chen and several uniformed officers staged discreetly nearby. The park was filled with families' checkered blankets spread on the grass, the smell of barbecue smoke in the air. Children laughed and chased each other. It was the picture of suburban bliss, a picture Karen Miller had desperately pathologically tried to preserve through control and ultimately violence. Evelyn saw Karen near the pavilion, holding court clipboard in hand, directing volunteers impeccably dressed in crisp white linen slacks and a navy top. The magenta scarf was absent today. Karen looked up as Evelyn and Detective Chen approached her polite smile, faltering slightly as she registered the grim expressions on their faces, the official capacity in which they were clearly acting. Other residents began to notice conversations, faltering heads turning. Karen Miller. Evelyn said, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the sudden hush that had fallen over the nearby picnic-goers. I'm Chief Evelyn Reed, Medical Investigations Unit. Even though Karen knew who she was, the formal introduction, the invocation of her title was deliberate, setting the stage. Karen's eyes darted around, sensing the shift in atmosphere, the eyes suddenly fixed on her. Chief Reed, she said, forcing a brittle smile. Is there a problem? Yes, Karen, there is, Evelyn replied, her gaze unwavering. On Tuesday afternoon, my 10-year-old son, Leo Reed, was poisoned. Someone injected ethylene glycol into his IV line in a deliberate attempt to murder him. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Faces turned pale. Mrs. Holloway, standing nearby with a plate of potato salad, dropped it with a clatter. Karen's face went white, her composure finally shattering. That's horrible. But what does that have to do with me? Her voice was shrill, laced with panic. We have forensic evidence, Karen. Detective Chen stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. A droplet of undiluted ethylene glycol found at the scene. Inside that droplet, a microscopic fiber, a magenta fiber. Karen instinctively touched her neck where the scarf was usually worn. Her eyes widened in terror. Chen continued, a fiber that perfectly matches the scarf you wore last Monday, the day before Leo was poisoned. The scarf we recovered from your closet under warrant. No. Karen stammered, backing away. No, that's impossible. It's a mistake anyone could have. That doesn't prove anything. It proves you were there, Karen. Evelyn said, her voice dangerously quiet. It corroborates the timeline, the opportunity. We also have your internet search history, researching poisons, looking up IV access points, all in the days leading up to the attack on my son. Karen stared at Evelyn, her face contorted with a mixture of fear and hatred. The mask was gone. The petty tyrant, the meticulous rule enforcer, was revealed as a desperate, cornered criminal. You did this! Karen spat, her voice trembling with rage. You and that sick child! You ruined this neighborhood, lowering property values with your constant medical trucks, your nurses, the whole spectacle. I just wanted to protect our community, our investment. The ugly confession hung in the air, shocking the assembled neighbors into stunned silence. Her motive, so selfish, so warped, laid bare for all to hear. Karen Miller. Evelyn said, her voice ringing with cold authority as uniformed officers moved in smoothly, flanking Karen. You are under arrest for the attempted murder of a minor and medical sabotage. Karen didn't resist as the handcuffs were snapped onto her wrists. She looked wildly around at the faces of her neighbors' faces that now reflected not respect or deference, but horror and disgust. Her meticulously crafted world built on rules and appearances had imploded. As she was led away past the silent, staring families, her reign over Hemlock Lane and her freedom came to an abrupt and decisive end. The picnic dissolved in a state of shock and confusion. But amidst the turmoil, there was also a sense of profound, if unsettling, clarity. The silence that had allowed darkness to fester had been broken. In the aftermath, the community grappled with its own complicity, its own failure to see to act. There were apologies, awkward conversations, a newfound determination among many residents to be more vigilant, more connected, more compassionate. The HOA board underwent a complete overhaul, its focus shifting from petty regulations to genuine community well-being. Karen Miller faced the full force of the justice system. The evidence against her was overwhelming. She was convicted on all charges and received a lengthy prison sentence commensurate with the horrific nature of her crime. Civil suits followed, stripping her and her husband of their assets, including the house on Hemlock Lane, ensuring she could never again hide her malice behind a veneer of affluence. Leo's recovery continued. It was slow, marked by setbacks, but underscored by his incredible resilience and Evelyn's unwavering love and advocacy. The long-term damage from the poisoning required ongoing therapies and adjustments to his already complex medical care, but he survived. He eventually returned home, not to the house on Hemlock Lane. Evelyn sold it, unable to erase the stain of what had happened there, but to a new home, a place chosen for warmth and accessibility, not for its address or HOA rules. Evelyn continued her work as chief of the MIU, her personal ordeal lending a new depth, a fiercer passion to her commitment to protecting the vulnerable from those who would exploit or harm them within the complex world of medicine and care. She had faced the ultimate nightmare, an attack on her child in their own home, and had fought back using her skills not just for justice, but for survival. The magenta scarf remained locked away in an evidence vault, a symbol of calculated cruelty. But for Evelyn, the more potent symbol was Leo's smile, weak but genuine, as he finally came home from the hospital. Justice had been served, a community awakened, and a child's life, though forever altered, had been saved. And in that hard-won victory, Evelyn found not just closure, but a renewed sense of purpose, a fierce determination to ensure that such darkness would never again be allowed to fester in the silence. The fight had taken its toll, but standing beside her resilient son, Evelyn knew with absolute certainty that it had been worth it.